Welcome to the second episode of Tales from the Bin. I know at the end of the first episode we mentioned we would be here with a special guest, but after some incident at the City Hall when I went to get a public records request on Friday, I decided to move this forward to the second episode as it was a little more important to discuss. We're going to be discussing Kevin Nabick's ship file. For anybody who's not aware, he's a Deltona firefighter and also the son of Commissioner Chris Nabick. This file was first requested on December 28th, 2016. The response to that came January 4th. It stated it would take about 3 hours to redact, 4 hours if you include the emails, and that they would notify this person when the record was completed. So I waited about 2 weeks and decided that I was going to ask to inspect the public record request that was done. And it still wasn't ready. I walked in to do an impromptu inspection. I sat with Ron Paradise and explained to him how I normally do my public records inspections and the process that it takes. They have a very thorough process. He went to get the file, came back and told me that the process is a little bit different now and that I have to put in a request. They will take the time and redact it. They'll call me when they feel it's ready to be inspected and they'll set an appointment to do so. Now, I've went all over public records inspections, and unless I'm missing something, I never saw anywhere where I needed to make an appointment to come in at a later date to check out a file. But I said that was fine, let me know. I put in my records request. Now, mind you, this is about, I would say, a week, maybe 2 weeks after the original request. That should have only taken 3 hours to redact. 2 weeks later, it's still not ready. I know that this person had asked for an update a good week later, didn't get a response. On the 23rd of January, so now we're almost pushing 4 weeks. On the 23rd, I sent an email and I explained to him that I felt more than enough reasonable time has passed. That it had been 2 weeks from my request and 4 weeks from the original request. I let them know that I would be in on the 24th at 3 p.m. and that if they were still going to deny me the record, they needed to provide me a list of where the file's been all the way back to November. When I got there, they did have it ready for me. I sat down, I video recorded the entire inspection, and the first thing I asked is this the original file redacted as is the date it was signed and closed? The clerk would not verify that. All that she would say is that that was the redacted file she was given. That's going to come into play later. I then asked for the original file to be in the room so that if there was anything that wasn't redacted and I wanted to compare the two to make sure that it was indeed the actual copy, I would like it in the room, and I was denied. They said that they could not bring the original file in the room. So from there I started going over the file. And I'm going to actually do that here with you so that as I go through it, I can point out some of the things that I found. It might be a little bit jumbled. I make no apologies for any language that may slip at some point. But this specific incident Friday has really pissed me off. And the fact that they continue to try to withhold the records, manipulate the records, this is what they want to do. So that's fine. I'll expose it here to you guys. You guys can make your own decisions, pull as many public records requests on it as you want. Let me know what you find. The first thing in the file that I came across was an email from September 20th. And it wants to clarify a few things in the file. This is from Angelia Briggs, which is our ship coordinator. She found that there might be a discrepancy with the mortgage approval, so let me just touch base on that real quick. What I found is 2 approval letters. The first loan approval was for a purchase price of $180,000 with the loan amount of $173,700. The second one, done roughly about a month later, was for only $120,000 purchase price and a loan amount of $113,000. Now, the only thing I can think of that comes to this, and I'm still having it researched because this really isn't my niche, but is that there are max limits in the SHIP program. The max limit of the purchase price would be $138,000. So for me looking at this, I can see that the first approval didn't qualify under the SHIP program. So a second one was done. Now it shows here that Angelia said that please confirm that they have reviewed our SHIP down payment assistance program guidelines and that their pre-approval comports to the program. Now do you see where I kind of connect the two? She went on to say, can you please provide an explanation of the income derived annually from Event Sports LLC? Now Event Sports LLC will be referred to as the Speedway from here on out. That's what it's labeled within the file. It's a seasonal employment that he's done for, 2016 for sure, because there's income in here. Let's talk about the Speedway income. They took out the Speedway income. They did not include it because they claim that he no longer was employed there. So I went back through some of the things in this file. And on 9/20/16, Angelia asked him, is he still employed with that employer? And he stated, no, I do not work for either. There's two that will become in question later on. However, in doing a thorough job like Angelia does, she reached out to the Speedway on 10/19/16, roughly a month after he stated he no longer worked there. They replied that he is still an active employee on a seasonal basis. Now, because that came through, Angelia would have to include that income as reoccurring income for the next year. However, they didn't, because here's what happened. Once that came through, there's some emails that go back and forth, and once that came through, he knew that he then had to resign from that job or they would have to include the income. And if you pull the emails, you'll be able to follow the trail of how Becky Vos, our city attorney, was now brought in to kind of interpret these rules and regulations with the SHIP program to see if they can include things or not include things. So on October 21st, which is after they've confirmed that he is still an active employee, he emailed to resign. And on October 22nd, a notice was sent out of his resignation with the ability to be rehired. Now, what I don't like is that that's done. It says that his termination date is 10/22. Yet on 9/20, he claimed he didn't work there. He knew full well that he was still going to work there on a seasonal basis. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 2017, you find him back there. So let's move on to the third thing she mentioned in this email. She wanted to have an explanation provided for income derived from this second medical facilities construction group. In all the research that I have found that his income from there seems to have ceased in 2015. There's documentation stating that, so I looked no further into that. Number 4, and the last thing she requested. She said, per our conversation, you did confirm that both bank accounts, checking and savings, belong to him, even though his mother is listed on the account. He's confirmed this. This is going to be important later on. So she wanted to ask about several deposits that she questioned. She couldn't find the source of income. Quite a few deposits. So the email comes back. They go back and forth for a little bit. He states he doesn't, and then there's an explanation of these deposits. Several of them he contributed to the Speedway. Several of them were graduation presents from family, birthday presents. And then there's a good list of them that, according to another email, he didn't want to list where it came from and what they were. In another email, I see that they're now labeled, all the deposits in the savings is labeled deposits for lawn. Also, keep that in mind. We're going to discuss that here in a minute. So now there's a calculation sheet of an amount that they're unable to source. Equals for the year $4,329. Keep these figures in mind because they're going to come up later. So there's a couple more emails that go back because I'm just going to go through the file for you. They go back and forth about his employment, some of the numbers. They had a meeting, tentative date. There's an email here for October 24th with Becky Vos. Again, I'm not 100% sure where this stuff came from or what was discussed in that meeting. I've asked for notes or notations, and there was none. On the 24th, an email comes out from Kevin Nabbick to Angelia with updated Speedway documents. And that's where he puts in that he's no longer with this Speedway, so now they don't need to count the income. There's some documentation back and forth. There's an email that goes out on the 25th, Becky included now on this, and it talks about the update from the previous day's meeting. They said that they're going to obtain verification from the Speedway that he's no longer there. They're going to update the list of these third-party sources of income, and then they're going to confirm the purchase assistance program would allow Kevin to obtain gifts from a family member. There's a little bit of dispute on that. Angelia reached out to somebody further up in the SHIP program, asked the process and procedures in some of these things, because there was some conflict about how Angelia read the laws and the rules to be, and how Becky Vos is reading and interpreting the laws to be in regards to this program. Now, mind you, we contract Becky Vos as our city attorney. That is it. She is not involved in the actual SHIP program herself. I did a public records request to find out how many SHIP files our SHIP coordinator, Angelia, has not signed. The result, 1. Can you guess what file? You're right, this file right here. This file was signed by Becky Vos, and under title, she didn't write City of Deltona Attorney. She wrote SHIP Representative. I don't remember us contracting her to be a SHIP representative at all. Like I said, you feel free to look into that. Whether she may have had the authority as a city attorney or not may or may not be in question, but what I do know is she should have labeled herself the city attorney, because that's what she is. First thing I noticed in this file when I first opened it is the application itself is 13 pages long. The first page, the second page were missing. The first page, I do have a blank copy of it, so I can compare and tell what it is. The first page is just like the cover letter. It talks about it's the SHIP program and the information. The second one, actually, it's a checklist. And so most people are probably wondering, well, why would they remove the checklist? Well, that's easy. I would be able to know what's supposed to be in that file. Without the checklist, they would assume that I would have no idea what actually is in the file and if it's a full file. That was a really poor thinking on their part. There's page numbers at the bottom. So when it starts at page 3, it's not rocket science that page 1 and 2 are missing. When it goes 7 of 13, 8 of 13, 10 of 13, it's not rocket science that page 9 is missing. Really should do a better job at manipulating your records. So in here, there's a bunch of files, couple tax returns, some bank statements. Angelia had reached out higher up in SHIP and said, you know, what do I do about these sources of income that he doesn't want to tell us what it's for? They said they would have to count that as an income. That's when it was then discussed, and if you actually look at the paperwork, it says lawn next to it. That comes into play because he has a lawn business. It's a lawn and landscaping business according to his own Facebook profile. The proof is there. It's here, 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 here. Well, you get the point. What I find interesting about this specifically is if you look at his tax return, believe it or not, I'm very well versed in taxes. Lucky for them. I looked at his tax return, and the one thing I can't find, if you notice the dates on the screenshots you just seen, they're all from 2015, okay? Let's take a look at his 2015 taxes. Well, lo and behold, there is 0 reported income for a business. So I'm sure they'll be getting a nice knock on the door from the IRS. Further in the file, we go through, there's some more emails back and forth. One particularly between Becky and Angelia, where they're talking pretty much about where are they. So Becky says, how did the totals come out? I thought you were going to notify somebody about it. She goes through the breakdown and says that he will qualify once they remove some of the deposits, putting him at $43,768, the max being $43,920. So I started looking at the figures, and man, in this file there's a lot of different figures where they come up and they're playing with the numbers back and forth trying to figure it out. Now Angelia is very by the book, so a lot of these have emails where she's confirming, so this is what we're not counting. Per this is how we're going to do it. There's a reason why she didn't sign this file. Let that sink in. She did not sign this file. And I asked how many files, she's been there 5 or 6 years, how many files has she not signed? This is the only one. So I asked Angelia during the inspection who has had the file, and I was told it stayed in the community development office, which clearly isn't the case when there's an email here stating that Becky at one point held the file. Now since then I've requested, and I believe a few other people have requested, a chain of custody on this file. The reason for that is I have good reason to believe that Chris Navik himself also, once this request first came through, went down there, had the file, and went through the file. It's going to be my opinion and thoughts that that's probably where some of these missing forms went. What I do find interesting is the income certification form that's done for year 2016-2017, which is signed by Becky. It talks about household assets, anticipated annual income. They wrote for 2016-2017 that the anticipated income is $39,438, which is well below the $43,700 that was accumulated in 2016 up to, I believe, like October. So I said, well, where did they get this number from? Well, it's the City of Deltona income along with his scheduled overtime. So let's look into the scheduled overtime. Here's my problem. They're saying that they're basing it off 3 hours of scheduled overtime a week because that's what they have to put in. That would make it 6 hours on their paycheck. So I looked at the couple paychecks that are actually just in this file. And let's see, one of them had 38.5. 38.5. In addition to the 6 scheduled. Another one, 12 on top of the 6. Another one, 16 on top of the 6. So to calculate these numbers on just the scheduled overtime would be ridiculous. We all know, you can look at past histories, it all shows there is going to be always more overtime than this scheduled overtime. So going on about the overtime, on September 28th, a letter came through that said as long as he didn't have any more overtime from that date to the end of the year, they could use that estimated income that you'll see on these figures. The problem with that is, like I said, if you go back to previous pay stubs, pretty much every week has some type of in addition to overtime. And you're actually going to see another episode on that shortly because there's a lot of additional overtime in that department. So we'll get into that later. But I wanted to kind of refer back to one of these emails between Becky and Angelia where the total gifts received over a 6-month period totaled $2,912. Gifts. Because according to this, Becky then says, are you still counting those? Angelia writes back, yes, because we're instructed that's the best practices. Can those practices be discontinued? If that's what you'd like me to do. We could use his City of Deltona income, and then yes, he would qualify. Sounds like they're playing with numbers. Sounds like they're trying to make this work. From here, I want to step over to, let's go page 44. of the file, and we're talking about the approval letter. Approval was sent out on November 17th of 2016. Qualified for up to $20,000 in down payment and $3,000 in closing costs. Now the reason I bring this up is because not long previous, November 17th, this came before the commission, and it was asked that the SHIP funding be raised to the $20,000. Not long, I believe it's 10 days later, I could be wrong, but I believe it was about 10 days later, he gets his approval for the now higher rate of $20,000. You can make your own conclusions on that. I find that a little interesting that it went before the commission right before his approval went through. Now, a lot of the rest of this file is financials, some of which are missing. Just different, pretty much numbers. So I'm not going to go through the rest of that. Feel free to request a copy of it. But I want to go through public records requests regarding this file. I went down there Friday because there was pages missing. And I had emailed previously and said that I had reason to believe pages were missing and I would like the chain of custody of the file. That still hasn't been fulfilled yet, by the way. But just on the fact that there's page numbers on the bottom, I know that I could specify specifically page 9. Looking at a blank application, I knew what was on that page, and I found it very odd that it was missing from the file. So I went down to the city hall on Friday, and I asked to speak to Angelia, and another lady came out, introduced herself as Denise. She's a SHIP administrator. And so I asked her, well, what is it you do? And she told me how she goes through the checklist, the one that's missing, and she makes sure everything that's supposed to be there is in there. Before the file's said and done, she makes sure it's all in there. Now, later finding that out, I then go upstairs and I speak to our clerk, and I make the request to have page 9. Before I leave, I wanted a copy of page 9. It doesn't take any time. The redaction would be very minimal. I didn't mind waiting. She was quick to go get it. She said that she actually just got it herself. It was no problem. And gave it to me. I went downstairs, paid the 15 cents for it, and lo and behold, it's blank. I paid for a blank piece of paper. It wasn't filled out at all. So, of course, the question came to mind, well, hold on, Denise just told me that she ensures that everything in here is done and filled out properly. So I asked to speak to Denise again. But instead of Denise coming out, Ron Paradise came out, and I explained to him that I requested it, I just paid for it, and the damn thing was blank. So I wanted the exact paper from the file. Now, mind you, this file is held right behind those doors. The original file. They can walk back there, they can pull that file, and they can grab page 9 out. So I requested him to do that. I said, I understand, I've already asked for the request, I want the actual one that is in his file. He said, no problem, he'd go get it. Comes back about 5 minutes later with a pad of paper and says, can I take your number because I can't locate page 9. Well, if the file is full and complete, like you've told me it is, then page 9 should be in that file. Why is it missing, and why am I given a blank copy, probably not even what's in his file, but a blank copy of the application itself, more than likely. Completely blank. Not one iota of a writing on it whatsoever, and they expect me to believe that it's blank in the file? We all know that's not true. They just withheld public records. They're now manipulating them, and now they've just denied my access to these records again. Speaking of public records, you know what I find really crazy? $19,000 is what Commissioner Alcantara was told it would cost to do a public records request on Tetra Tech. Why do I find that crazy? According to what I've understood and what I've read, when we do business, let's say with Tetra Tech, we are to, at the end of our contract, have all the files. So why would we have to pay Tetra Tech $19,000, and that number was miraculously already at the top of City Manager Jane's head because she was able just to spit it out. Not that there would be any collusion there, or wasn't, already said, hey, make sure you have that number handy. But $19,000 for him to get his public records request. And not ever has a commissioner ever had to pay that, but here we are at a meeting discussing how he should have to pay that money if he wants the records. Ridiculous what they're doing to us and how closed they're trying to make our government. Okay. On top of all this, the public records requests, the denial, the manipulation of the record, the fact that it's clear not a full record when there's pages missing. We then have, after this is all said and done, the Inspector General of the Florida Housing Authority, which oversees SHIP in the state, has now requested the file. Why? Well, they were asked to. They were giving everything under the moon that they may need to investigate this file. So they've requested it. Well, now that this new little public request procedure where all the commissioners get it, now all the commissioners know that the Inspector General has stepped in and wants to view this file. So what happens? Kevin Nabbitt comes up there and submits a letter stating he no longer wants the funding. Like, that's really going to get you off the hook for trying to defraud the SHIP program. This is just, it's getting way out of hand. This is just a tip of what you're going to find in future episodes. I think I've done pretty well at explaining this and trying to stay a little bit professional with this. Stay tuned for episode 3. We are going to have that special guest on. And until then, try to stay out of the bed.